Excellent, great to see some familiar faces and some new ones. Okay, I think we're ready to start, so we'll hand over to you, Liz.
O tēnā rā koutou katoa, nei te mihi ki a koutou katoa, koi hui hui mai nei e tēnei ata. Kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. He karakia timatanga, me ino e tātou. Whakatakata hou ki te uru, whakatakata hou ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te ata kura, he tiu, he huka, he hauhu, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ora.
Oh. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, no mai haere mai ki kōrero ko Erica Austin toku ingoa. Welcome to Growing a Learning City, a conversation with trustees and advisors of Ako Ōtautahi-Learning City Christchurch. My name is Erica Austin. I am the program coordinator and also your host for this conversation today. A few tech points before we start. Please stay muted unless asked to be unmuted. This helps lower any disruptions during the session. The chat function is your friend. Post any questions, comments, observations or reflections in there as we go. We do love interactions, so please utilize the emojis, the reaction emojis down the bottom, or use your body language as we go. We can see most of you on the screen, so don't worry about that. The session is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, so feel free to share with your networks if you find this session interesting after this, this Zoom call. So let's start. I will share my screen with a few slides. So for those of you who are not familiar with Ako Ōtautahi Learning City Christchurch. Learning City Christchurch's vision is for a coordinated, equitable and future-ready city where learning and well-being is accessible for everyone. We are committed to creating opportunities for all people. We focused on equity, access, and innovation. We believe a learning city really is also about place-based and intergenerational learning. And so this event here is part of our Learning Days Festival. And we're hopefully focusing on events that will celebrate all of this week. Great. I'm just admitting some new people joining into our session, so give them a couple of seconds to join our conversation and we'll continue.
Great.
Awesome. Cool. I will stop sharing and I will hand it over to Cheryl. So welcome all the new people that's joined in this session.
Kia ora koutou, ko Cheryl Doig, tōku ingoa. E rere taku manu ki te tihi o Auraki, rere iho taku manu me te awa o Waimakariri, tau ana taku manu ki te whenua o Waitaha, ko kaitahu te mana whenua, te iwi whakaruru hau. My bird flies to the summit of Auraki. It descends via the Waimakariri River to land on this land of Canterbury, where kaitahu is our sheltering tribe. We believe a learning city must have mana whenua, the tribal ancestors of the land, at the heart and as partners. And we're privileged in Ako Ōtautahi to be guided in this space by Mataraka Mahanui. It's my pleasure at this stage to hand over to Liz Brown to share some opening thoughts from Mataraka Mahanui and herself about the foundations of a learning city. So I'll hand over to you, Liz, and thanks for being part of our mahi. Just microphone on.
See, I was following protocols of turning my mic off. Well, kia ora anō. Ko Liz Brown toku noa he ori o nai tarua heki heki nai tua haereri ko nai tahu te iwi. Kia ora everybody, and thanks for that intro, Cheryl. I'm honoured to be able to share just some opening thoughts around learning and education and what it should look like in the future. I want to start though with a whakatauki. Kia mau koi ki ngā kupu o tūpuna. So hold fast to the words of your ancestors. And that kind of picks up on what Erica was just alluding to around intergenerational, but also preparing for the future. And really, we need to examine the past to inform what we do in the future for education. And if we look at what education or learning was like in pre-industrial times, we can then take the best of each to inform what a learning community should look like now. And I'm excited by Ako Ōtautahi and growing a learning city because I think it gives the opportunity for learning to be reintegrated into the community, which is just so important. We need to develop a greater understanding of place, and so Erica picked up on that. That's one of the key parts of Ako Ōtautahi, is around place-based pedagogy and understanding. And we need to develop a greater understanding of the place we live in, drawing on pre-colonial knowledge as well as the more recent knowledge base that has developed here in Ōtautahi. And if you understand your local place and your context, then you can apply it in global situations as well. And if we've got ecological and place-based understandings, that will help us prepare for the future as we grapple with climate change and other challenges. And from a Māori perspective, the environment actually shapes culture, not the other way around. And so that's a really interesting thing to think about, is that our environment shapes the way we do things. And we can even look across, and if we look at the fires that happened in Australia, if they'd actually looked at how the Aboriginal people used to use fire breaks and things, we can take a lot of good ways into the future by examining the past. Another challenge for us as a learning community is to create that positive and safe environment, which we've referred to as one of our principles as well, for all akonga, whether they're young or old. And that starts with valuing identity, language and culture of both tangata whenua, mana whenua, as well as tangata treaty. And if we frame our thinking in terms of tangata whenua and tangata treaty, it gives everybody a place to stand in Ōtautahi and say, I belong, through being tangata treaty. So it's not exclusive, it's not divisive. It gives everybody that place to stand and say, I belong. And so I just want to finish this with a whakatauki for us all to think about as well. And I love whakatauki because there's heaps and heaps and heaps of learning within whakatauki, and you can apply them in so many situations. So I'm going to finish with hui tātou ka tū, wehi wehi tātou ka hinga. United we stand, divided we fall. And so it's through us all having this vision for Ako Ōtautahi that we will succeed and rise to the challenges. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Liz. Thank you so much for that. So today our three trustees, Cheryl Doig, Phil Gehring and Ellie Archer, are joined online by our advisors Liz Brown and Penny Abbey to share some thoughts about growing a learning city. We have an apology from our other advisor, Robin Sutton. He can't be here today, but we'll continue this conversation with the people that are present. So let's start with some brief introductions. Maybe let's start with you, Cheryl.
Thanks so much, Erica, and such a fine start from Liz. And I just want to build on some of those thoughts, I guess. So my name's Cheryl Doig. I'm one of the trustees of Ako Ōtautahi-Learning City Christchurch. I have a background in education and in innovation and futures thinking. I grew up in Ōtautahi Christchurch, and I'm passionate about growing a learning city. For me, learning is a particular focus because I think it takes us beyond the silos of schools, universities and businesses to a wider focus, as Liz said, on lifelong learning and to intergenerational opportunities. I think just acknowledging we've had some pretty tough times in Christchurch over the last 10 years, but we're a resilient lot, and there have also been lots of positive things happening to make this a great place to live and learn. I walk into town with my husband every Sunday, and there's always something new happening and lots of new experiences. I think COVID has accelerated some changes in learning, especially in the use of technology, some new flexibility in work environments and agility in thinking, or at least I'm hoping so. It's also highlighted, though, the growing gap between those who've been able to access support and learning and those that haven't. And I think we've got some real urgent needs in terms of equity, and it's up to all of us to take action. There are heaps of great examples of learning already happening in the community. We have the Bachelor of Youth and Community Leadership at the University of Canterbury, which is a real focus on customising learning and the whole idea of social action. There's the Health Tech Supernode Challenge being undertaken at the moment with a whole lot of partners and based at Te Auhaka. At Tūranga, our city library, there's a whole lot of community learning happening in spaces like the maker spaces and the music studios. We're the first city in New Zealand to have its own children's university. We also have Link, which is a leadership in communities program, building and growing the capability of leaders in all sorts of different community groups around the city. And this year includes Puawai, which is a youth and community group. We have Tokona Te Raki, the Māori Futures Collective. We have Grow Waitaha, which is supporting change in schools in the greater Christchurch area and really encouraging schools and communities to join together. And of course, we have Mataraka Mahanui empowering Ngāi Tahutanga in schools. These are just some of the examples of what's happening, but I love what this and other examples are bringing. And what I particularly love is that they're being developed in the community, by the community, for the community. The more that we can work together, the better, and hence my passion for a learning city. So you'll see that, that the activities for our learning days provide intergenerational hands-on experiences with tech. There's conversations about racism and homophobia, and there's also conversations about what success actually might look like in the future. We've got experts sharing their knowledge in health research, learning ecosystems, and citywide trends in business. And I think diversity and inclusiveness across the city is a really important focus for us to grow intentionally across the city, and to have learning opportunities that connect us all so that we're all working together to grow learning across the city. So those are my opening thoughts on growing a learning city. Back to you, Erica.
Cool, we'll pass it over to Phil. Kia ora, Phil.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Aotearoa te maunga, ko whakaraupo te moana. Ko Ngāti Pākehā aho, ko Phil Gearing tōku ingoa. So my name's Phil Gearing. I'm the Managing Director of Synapsis. So it's a learning solutions company which was founded in Ōtautahi and supports learning across a mix of corporate, government and education clients. I guess I'm on the trust because I've always been passionate about learning, and I consider myself really lucky to have been brought up in a family that from day one saw learning as fundamental to how we thrive as individuals and what we do. Both my parents were teachers, and I was lucky enough or unlucky enough, I suppose, to have both of them as my teachers at secondary school, an interesting experience. But so I guess I started off with that foundation, but as I've got older, I've spent more time thinking about the role of learning in society as distinct from what it means for me personally. And I do see it as the foundation through which we will achieve equity. It is the most powerful lever we have in that regard. And I kind of look at what's happening in the US and the degradation of democracy that's occurring over there. And it makes me wonder whether learning itself is a foundation stone without which we're really going to struggle in terms of our democratic existence. COVID, everyone's challenged with in terms of how we cope with what's happening to us personally, mentally, economically. And again, I would say that learning is probably at the heart of us, understanding how we're going to survive and thrive in a world that is going to continue to accelerate and change faster than it ever has done. In terms of what learning looks like today, there's little I can add to what Cheryl's outlined in terms of activity within the city, but I'd make a couple of comments about learning as a concept and how it's shifting. And I guess I just see it in a state of really, really rapid transition and change. And there's three things I'd point to that seem to me to permeate learning, irrespective of whether we're in kahanga reo or whether we're in a business where that learning is taking place. One of those things is that we're starting to shift our thinking away from notions of qualifications and formal recognition, and more talking about smaller, granular, targeted pieces of learning that are there to support our immediate needs. And I think that's a feature of learning that's going to become more and more endemic as time goes by. We're also starting to think less of learning as a process by which teachers teach those that don't know, to one where learning is an innate process within us, that it is the learner themselves that are deciding what their learning needs are. They're deciding how they're going to go about learning. They're deciding what success looks like for them. And I welcome that as a shift in terms of how we think about learning. And the last trend that I'd point to is that we're thinking less of learning being something that we step out of our lives to do. We step out of our work or out of our family lives to go and learn. And we're thinking much more about learning being something that happens continuously, naturally, inevitably as part of our daily lives and how we live. And those things, I think, are all good things in terms of the sustainability of the impact of learning in our lives and for this city that we love. So I guess that's a bit about me. Thanks for that. I'll move on to the next trustee.
Cool. Ellie.
Nā mihi nui ki a koutou, ko Ngāti Tamatera, rawa ko tūhoi, rawa ko ngā puhi o ngā iwi, ko Ellie Archer taku ingoa. Right, always going last is the best, right? So I'm going to start with the I before I get to the we. So I'm primarily a self-reflective practitioner. My mother and my father, when I was very young, my mother gave me a book, and at the same time my father gave me, and she said, go do it. And my father gave me a screwdriver and said, you go, reverse. Mother gave me a book and said, go learn about it. Dad gave me a screwdriver and said, go do it. So my whole life, I've either been doing those two things simultaneously or one at a time. So learning has been a big factor, especially coming from a lower socioeconomic area that we did. It's been a huge factor for me, and has helped me to carve the pathway that I'm currently on, as well as the one that's coming tomorrow. So I'm a self-reflective practitioner. I really want to be the best me to aid in delivering my purpose as I'm discovering my meaning more and more every day. I'm a big picture person who works and walks in varying spaces, spread across business, industry, government, and the community. So my life is about driving fundamental transformation from me to we. So now I want to move into the we side of things. the passion regarding learning cities really started, and moving from me into societal learning, came from the learnings as a senior geospatial technologist through smart cities thinking and smart industries. So thinking smart, its primary kaupapa, the smart kaupapa, is about interconnection and the development of common understanding. So with education, identity, and accessible learning being a core element in achieving that specific vision. As I move through, as I said, the varying spaces that I'm currently in, whether it being either a director, a leader, a servant, arguably a servant in all spaces, the common thread is what we don't know, or a lack of understanding. And that to me is rife, even throughout our leadership, dare I say, our leadership in several spaces. The other side of things, as an industry person who works in multiple industry sectors, we see the need for cross-pollinating skills. So, and how are we able to facilitate that? And this is where microbyte learning, as Phil mentioned before, is really coming to the fore in a lot of trade or industry conversations. Annie, our kōrero with Urban Pacifica Planning regarding what's required there. With microbyte learning, even just for technology to aid in upskilling our people, is super important, and it could be used for multiple areas, including the sharing of knowledge and the transparency of that knowledge as we move through into the transformative time that is now. So I can go on and on. I'm super passionate about this space. But it's how we do it together, because that's the other thing. We can't do the lone wolf anymore and go, this is the way to go. And we're not engaging with others and engaging in this kōrero through our communities and at varying levels, including the boardroom. I always say from boots to suits. And that's very important to me. So I'll leave it there, because obviously we've got some more questions coming up, but that's kind of how I wanted to start my kōrero. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Cheryl, Phil, and Ellie, our trustees. I will hand it over to Penny Abbey, one of our advisors, to introduce herself.
Kia ora koutou, ko Penny Abbey tōku ingoa, he tumuaki o te kura tuataha o Paparoa Street. I am involved in this discussion today as an advisory trustee, and that role is from my position as an educator in primary sector in what is, in Christchurch, still quite a traditional education field. I've been passionate about learning for all of my life, and have been leading that learning for 30 odd years. So in lots of different contexts. I'm sitting within the traditional education system, but am interested in the conversations that we're having today, and how we can shift schools thinking as much as adults thinking and the city's thinking around how learning happens. Whilst a traditional school perspective has often been about learners being a deficit that needs fixing or filling, how I see my school of 500 students is really more about 500 brains and what problems can they solve, because they have collectively more knowledge than I have. So what can I gain from them? What do they know that I don't, and vice versa? And interesting listening to Phil and his perspective around learning being something that is natural and part of what we do in our community, and certainly when our 5-year-olds arrive in our school, they are well and truly capable of that. And something happens at school that gets in their way. So how do we stop getting in their way and simply let them develop their capability to learn naturally? I want to talk a little bit around the direction we're trying to take in terms of what learning looks like today, and moving away from the academic measurements and the measurement around acquisition of knowledge. And if any of you have been in the media space over the last fortnight, there's been significant debate and comment about the fact that we've moved to child-centered learning and that we're moving away from knowledge acquisition, and how terrible that is. In our school, we are looking to develop students' capabilities. We want learning to be engaging, to be creative, and to enhance curiosity. There's no question about core curriculum at all, because without core curriculum, the rest of the knowledge is very difficult to access. But it's more about how do we develop great learners, and how do we value what learning is about. So I'm just going to share with you a selection of slides, and I've promised Cheryl that I won't speak to every one of them because there's quite a few, around how we are reporting or having our children report on their learning capability. So a short story before we start. Last year in our school, we had a conversation about whether it would be possible to improve our learning capacity in core curriculum if all we did all year was teach science. And we thought we'd have a go at it. So last year, the only thing we taught at Paparoa Street School was science. And that took all sorts of fantastic context. We had lots of place-based learning. We had lots of experimenting, as children would anticipate that was what they would like to do. But in the end, what we were focusing on was not what they knew about science, but how capable they were as scientists in the end. So at the end of that time, our students and our teachers reported on this to their parents. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of how that worked. So have a read of what this says, and it'll give you a little bit of context. So this is what our parents received as part of their school report. The children were asked to demonstrate. I just need to find the right button for forwarding. Here we go. Oh, no, too fast, sorry. These were the 5 science capabilities that we were looking at and learning through. And the students needed to show that what they could do in these areas. These are the things that this particular student could demonstrate evidence of. And here are some examples of the evidence that this student supplied in relation to engaging with science. You'll see that a lot of the work that they've done, he's talked about we, so it was a collaborative project. Sorry, they're just flicking through quite quickly, so I'll just slow things down a little. So these children were 9-year-olds, and they are regularly asked to provide evidence and can talk about that in a knowledgeable way as they work through their learning. This year we've moved away from science and we're looking at capabilities around our learning capacity. So this is about noticing ourselves as learners. In this example, there is a mosaic of skills that we hope our children will develop over time. And at the beginning of this year, this particular child was focusing on the highlighted areas here. And again, they are able to provide evidence that says, this is how I know, this is what I notice about myself as a learner. And you'll see within these, the context that they're using this time are not in a particular curriculum area, but are in a number of different areas and often in relation to their core curriculum. This particular piece is interesting around taking the time to think deeply. This is from a 9-year-old boy, and 9-year-old boys are not the best at writing. In fact, it's not something that they love at all. Yet this child has been able to identify his capabilities and what really works for him in order to have him produce something that he's proud of. And we often talk about learning being prickly here at our school. And this is a good example from a student who recognises that. So just some ideas for you to understand how we're working through that context and how we're trying to grow students' capabilities rather than growing their knowledge. And it's a challenge because it's not something that parents have traditionally been able to or interested in measuring their students' capacity in at primary school. But it's also what we're looking for is their capacity to become great problem solvers. They have that ability. If they understand how their learning is happening and what they can access and what works for them, then we believe that that will impact on them long term as they move beyond traditional schooling and work in broader contexts across our city. If we had students that can come out of traditional school with a better sense of themselves as a learner, then ideally learning will be happening continuously rather than it being something that finishes once you leave school. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Penny. I just saw that in your slideshow, the Pack Street Community Garden was featured. I live right next door to it, and it's amazing to see the range of education programs that they're providing for all ages, and also very hands-on and place-based. We have heard from Liz at the start a little bit, but Liz, would you like to add more thoughts or introduce yourself a little bit more?
Kia ora anō. Like many others, I've been involved in education for a long, long time. I actually don't want to count how many years I've been involved in education now. It seems like I've never actually left the education system. I started off as a primary school teacher. I became a lecturer at the College of Education. I moved across to the Ministry of Education, and now I'm back at the University of Canterbury. So it just seems that I just go from one learning destination to another. As Cheryl talked about before, I chair Mataraka Mahanui, which is a collective of 3 of the local Ngāi Tahu Rūnanga, Ngāi Tuahariri, Taumutu and Rapaki. And so we have been working in we started as an advisory board to the ministry post-earthquake. We've grown legs and changed from being an advisory board to actually have a delivery arm. And we've been working across early childhood, primary and secondary, around place-based pedagogy, Ngāi pedagogy. We are really wanting to see ourselves reflected in all aspects of learning, so that our children are proud of being Māori, are proud of being Ngāi Tahu, and see it reflected in the learning destinations that they're at. And so we also believe that knowing yourself is great for our Ngāi Tahu and our Māori children, but it's actually really good for all children to understand the environment that they actually live in and to understand the stories. So that's our passion and our commitment. We also have run a 10-week professional development course for teachers, where they can upskill in their te reo development, as well as their immersion in Ngāi Tahutanga as well. And so we do want to acknowledge the support we've had from the Ministry of Education in supporting us at Mataraka Mahanui, also supporting those teachers because they're actually released for 10 weeks from the classroom through over that period, which is a really exciting initiative that actually isn't happening anywhere else in the country. So it is very local, it is very place-based, and it is very Mataraka Mahanui. And so as everybody's talked about their passion for learning, I too equally share that passion with all the people on the Ako Ōtautahi board and advisory members as well. So kia ora, that's a little bit about me. Oh, I come from Taumutu Runanga. I still run children's days, tamariki days in the school holidays. Just had one on Thursday, and that always helps keep me grounded as well, where you have children from sort of, well, 6 months old through to 80-year-old children who come along to tamariki day, and so you need to be always able to think on your feet and ensure that you're still relevant. So kia ora.
Kia ora, Liz, and I just want to acknowledge Anne and Marion for posting on the chat. Thank you for your comments, and we'll come back to those. We'll start exploring a little bit more about what learning cities are and what our learning cities might look like in the future. So Cheryl, could you tell us a little bit about what is a learning city for a start?
Yep, sure. I won't take too long on this, but hopefully you can see that. Yes, Erica?
Yes, yep.
Oh, great, cool. So there's lots of definitions about a learning city, what it is, but essentially it is, as we've all talked about, the mobilising humanity and all the other resources right through all levels of education to promote inclusive learning. It is about learning for families and communities, so whānau is at the heart, and intergenerational opportunities. It's about the workplace, and it also, the movements generally include some of the growth of information or learning technologies and how they might best enhance our learning. And so any learning city movement always has a pathway, a culture of learning throughout life, and I think that's critical. And I think we've all talked about that a little bit in our work. The other apart from our work in Ōtautahi is we're a movement for change. So our role is in influencing, not becoming another power base. We're an independent group. We don't belong to council or any other organisations. But what we want to do is make visible the things that are already in existence, and sometimes connect those people and network. So, for example, we had a group of people we knew were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, but they didn't know about each other, and so we held a meetup where they could talk and share ideas and opportunities, and we see that as an important part of our role. and also building the coherent stories about learning and making that more explicit so that it becomes much more connected as a city. And the last comment, never presumes. Our role as a learning city is never to presume that we know anything other than our tiny little piece of knowledge. And as Liz and others have said, that the place and the community is where the mahi typically should happen, because they know best what their needs are. So if you do want to find more about a learning city, on our website, on the Discover tab, you'll see 4 examples of some of the learning city movements. There's learning cities and there's cities of learning. Have a look at those for more information. But I thought I'd just I'd share when we were setting up a couple of years ago, we asked community people what they thought about learning. And so I just want to read you some of their comments about how they saw Christchurch Ōtautahi in 2030. We're known for vibrant, equitable, interconnected education opportunities, not known for what school you went to. There's a universal access to learning opportunities. Success is redefined. Great learning happens across ages, spaces, places, and groups. And there's global recognition as educated in Christchurch. So those were some of the stretch ideas that people had when they were looking at a learning city in the future. That's all from me.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. So now we know a little bit about what a learning city is, or a city of learning is. I have a question for our trustees and advisors, and you can just put your hand up. I can see you on the screen. What does tomorrow's learning city look like to you? If you want to put your hand up, I will unmute you and you can speak. Anyone want to contribute to that? Phil, all right.
Kia ora. I guess the first thing I would say is that ultimately the test of our success is the identity of Ōtautahi being reflected in the learning city. If what we see is an identity that could be for any city, then perhaps we've missed the mark. So the starting point for the conversation has to be, who are we? And what is us that's reflected in that city? And for me, the obvious starting point is mana whenua. That's where the conversation must start. But then I start to think about our experience in terms of earthquakes as a defining characteristic, and how we understand resilience and community and approaches to mental health. And these sorts of attributes, the economic base in terms of land, these are the things that have to flavour or shape our perceptions of what the learning city is. And in terms of how it functions, I guess I spend a lot of my time engaged in issues around future of work and employment, and the shifts that are coming around changing demographics for what roles exist, what roles are needed, what roles are disappearing, and the challenge that we all have around how we cope with this big shift that's happening in terms of work. And at the heart of that, it appears to be that the answer lies in our own sense of self, our own passions, our own strengths. And it's less about saying, I think I've got a future in engineering, and more about saying, as an individual, these are my strengths and passions, and now I need to connect those to the future of work and understand where the opportunities are. And if that's the challenge we've all got, then I think that's the opportunity for Learning City Christchurch Trust. It's the ability to bring a regional, a local view about how we can connect our passions to what's happening around us. And it really intrigues me that when you talk to people about work they're going into, they'll talk at a sector level or a national level about a profession, or they'll talk about a local business that they've heard of or know about, or some relationships they've got. But it's really difficult for people to actually see meaningfully, tangibly, where the opportunities are in Ōtautahi for them, given their passions. And it's hard because it's a combination of who we are as individuals, what educational training experiences there are, what industries are out there that are looking for people, what skills are needed. And I think there's an opportunity for the Trust to really bring together an eclectic mix of information that lets people see their own regional community in a way that's very difficult to see just now. So I'd hope that that's a piece of tomorrow's learning city anyway. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Phil. Ellie, do you have any comments on that?
Oh yeah, I think. Oh yeah. Look, I'm also going to just briefly kōrero about learning how to be human. This is a common thread wherever we go. I'm hearing kōrero about meaning, about purpose, about what's my role, what part can I play in society, and what value can I add to our community or life in general. So the other thing there is identification of what our core values are. We're even as adults having conversations about ethics and what do I stand for and what are my principles. I see a lot of, I'm seeing trends now in the study of our own makeup, primarily through varying profiles, people profiling, aiding in better understanding our own identity. And this is, I think, the human factor side is a primary core learning for our today, for us to move forward in unity tomorrow. So that capturing that is going to be very important. And I think, and I look at what some of our schools, I met with Marty the other day, who's a principal for Hororata in Selwyn. What a transformative dude. What a cool guy to talk to. And the way that he's working with his kids in ethics and principles and that sort of thing. And really getting to the core of learning in that space. And then I step outside that and I walk into some of our industry courses today and the internal trainings within companies, within industry sectors or subsectors, and the concentration once again on who are you? How are you made up? Why are you such a dick in reaction to that specific thing? Why, and those lovely, open and transparent conversations around our behaviors and how we react to things and how we move forward and what our role is. And I think before we go anywhere else, knowing who we are is fundamental to how we're going to add value to society. I think is very important. There's other things, we love running things, Cheryl mentioned it before, like Connect Labs. This is that connection situation. Everyone's talking about collaboration and integration, and that's lovely, but how do we do that? How do we work together, and how do we bring those siloed areas and connection together? And I think running those Connect Labs to better understand each other's perceptions, now working from ourselves, now trying to understand the person across from us, I think is absolutely vital. As we move forward in collaboration from equity to equality through to unity. And I think we've got to capture that and do the best we can in those spaces to have those open conversations.
Cool. Thank you, Ali. I just wanted to thank Cheryl for a comment there. What makes Ōtautahi unique helps shape our city of learning. And as a Christchurch ambassador myself, I'm very passionate about the city and just looking back in the decade of what we've been through. Cheryl alluded to this idea of like the three different crises really helped to shape who we are. But amazingly, thinking about, the rebuild really gave us an opportunity to focus or highlight the physical architecture that surrounds us, our relationship with the whenua. And the shooting really helped draw our attention to the social architecture, how we relate and connect to people. And the recent COVID really helped us having a connection with the technologies that are available and creating this virtual architecture that we're currently using in the session. And so Ōtautaki is a really unique place to form what we can collectively bring to create this learning city that we want to see in the future. So that's really cool. I have another question. Feel free to put in the chat your questions as well, and we'll hopefully answer that before the session ends. But my next question is, if you could remove all barriers and constraints, what project or learning initiative would you roll out today? Penny, would you like to start answering this question?
Sure. Look, for me, it's about the accessibility and agility. And I think if there was one thing that I would love to see happen and we're able to get started, it would be about our improving our strength through what Ali talked about connecting and collaborating rather than being driven by competition. And if there's any way that we can have people understand the learning opportunities there are in a broader sense across the city and have those things accessed. And, you know, if it was as simple as in a school context, if I had a van and I knew what was happening, my learners could learn anywhere. And if that happened in a senior care residence, or it happened in a special school, or it happened in a neighbourhood where there was a van and it was possible for people to climb on the van and go and learn because they knew what was happening, it would be a really simple way of opening the city up and making sure that we had an opportunity to share all of the learning opportunity without there being barriers for accessing it.
Thank you. Liz. Oh, and Cheryl, put your hand up. But Liz, I'll pass it on to you and then we'll go back to Cheryl.
So from my perspective, it is about everybody being valued as learners. And I think we've still got a way to go in that space. And so I was just reflecting on Penny and the van, because at one stage I taught at Van Ash, and it was a really, really well-resourced school. I taught hearing children there. We had a school bus, and I used to just throw my whole class on it. We didn't have all the health and safety rules. You could just load the kids on the bus and take off, and it was great. And so I'm totally with you about getting out into the environment and learning out in the environment. And it's so much more meaningful and purposeful if you're actually there. So to me, that would be getting out and learning by doing, experimenting, taking risks, I think is really important. We don't take enough risks these days. And so that would be one of the changes that I'd really want to see. Short and sweet, and let Cheryl have a go.
Mine's going to be short and sweet too, and it's about a citywide program of micro-credentials, which lots of people have referred to, and I'm not talking about in the traditional sense. We already have some micro-credentials happening in our academic institutions, but imagine if we recognised people for the work that they were doing and that was grown from the community and acknowledged, and there was a real understanding of everyone's place in the learning. I think that would be an amazing goal to work towards.
Cool, thank you, Cheryl. I actually want to invite Marion to unmute herself and then maybe comment on the comment that you've typed into the chat, and maybe expand on anything that you wish to have a conversation with the advisors and trustees. Marion?
Yeah, hi, kia ora. I was just wanting to say that it's I saw that article and stuff as well about how standards are dropping since it's become student-centred, and I think it's more about what they're still measuring against, and that they're old measures, and really they need to be looking at what's valued and measuring what's valued, and not necessarily just basing everything on standards that have been around since day dot.
Cool. Thank you. Are there anyone else that would like to have a question? Oh, Amy. Thank you for your comment there. Would you like to unmute yourself and maybe talk a little bit about Children's University and what that might look like in the future of creating a learning city?
Hi, can you hear me okay? I wasn't planning on speaking, so yeah, I'm not really set up for it. Yeah, so I just had a thought there when you said that, Cheryl, about micro-credentials not always being based in institutions. So often Jack and I get comments from parents saying, oh, we need our own passport to get stamps for Children's University. So, maybe that is something we can look at is like the children are getting recognition for the learning that they're doing outside of the curriculum, pushing out of their comfort zone, trying new things, and their whānau is a big part of that. And so maybe that's something we can look at. But yeah, I mean, for our program, it's just this year has been really tough, obviously, but we're looking at celebrating 2 graduations this year, and we've got 30 schools waiting to be part of what we do, which is incredible. So provided we can get funding, we will get bigger. We will be looking at expanding across more of Canterbury. So the future's looking bright, but not without its challenges, of course.
Thank you, Amy, and love all your work with Jack on the Children's University, and it's great to see that a lot of the schools have signed up to participate. Just really mindful of time. We have 3 minutes before this session is ending, so I will quickly share the slideshow to acknowledge our partners. We cannot do what we do at Ako Ōtautahi without our amazing partners listed here. And also, if you want to continue our engagement and find out more about how to grow a learning city, please visit our website and email us at info@learningscitychristchurch. .nz actually, there's the .nz left out from here. And also, again, just to remind you that this event is part of Learning Days Festival, is the first day of our festival. So it's a week-long festival focused on equity, access and innovation. And there are a number of organisations that are hosting innovative in-person and online learning events to connect some of the many learning opportunities across Ōtautahi Christchurch. So please do check it out and please share with your networks. And we will now close with a whakatauki. Au kahatia tō waka, kia humia e te ao, kia puhia e te hou, ka huri noatia tō hui, ka aro tō nui tia ka whetū. Tighten the binds of your waka so that when pulled upon by the tides and blown by the winds, you can but turn your paddle and continue to heed the stars. I will unshare my screen and pass it to Liz to close officially with a closing karakia.
Kia ora anō, me no tātou. Tu tawa mai I ronga, tu tawa mai I raro, tu tawa mai I roto, tu tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, everyone.